All right, let's retake it. From the top. From the top, 18.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here. It is a Patreon pick week. This week we are ranking the albums of Judas Priest. We're getting into a little metal here. It's been a while since we've done any metal on the channel. A lot of albums to get to, 18 in total that we're ranking. Any experience with these guys? Joe's wearing the shirt, so I think he's maybe heard this band before.
Yeah, I know I've started to there's a chance I've never heard one of these albums all the way through. I did have pretty good knowledge of about 15 to 20 songs just from like metal playlists and all that, but I feel like I've gone to an album or two, but I don't really have anything cataloged or remember it. Before I spoil my thoughts, I've thought long and hard about this. I think Judas Priest might be the best band name of all time. It's pretty badass.
It is a great band name. I was familiar with most of these albums. I'd never listened to the Tim Ripper Owens ones because I have respect for myself. And there's a couple others throughout. I don't think I listened to all of the newer ones after the comeback, but I did know Firepower. And but I think I was pretty familiar with the entire original run.
So I think I'm kind of in a similar boat as Cram. I am not sure. I probably have, but I don't have specific memory of listening to full albums. I know a bunch of songs just throughout the catalog, and I have seen them live before. I saw them the year that they co-headlined Ozfest with Sabbath.
There's also an embarrassing amount of confusion I had as a young boy, probably from ages 6 to 10 to 11. I really didn't know the difference between Rob Halford and the guy that wears the leather pants in Nightmare on Elm Street 2 in the shower when he's like in that dream sequence and he's beating the hell out of the main character. Didn't really know those were two different people until I was about 10 or 11 years old. So every time I would see like a music video for Judas Priest, I was like, is this a guy from Nightmare on Elm Street? Why is he also in a band? It's cool that he did this cameo in this horror film, but they're two separate people. And that's it. But it was an early exposure to like leather culture, if I may. We should not be corrupting our kids with horror movies and leather culture. But God damn it, get your kids to listen to Judas Priest.
All right. Lots of records to get to, like I said. So we're going to start rattling off four at a time until we get to the top 10, and then we'll go one by one. Who's starting us off this time? I think Joe should go last. Cram going first.
I'd like to start because I don't think you guys know where I'm going with any of this. In our personalized text group, I was trying to be as coy and as popular as possible, excuse me. My number 18, I've got Jugulator. You're getting some of that less crystal clear sound of metal and embracing more of like that late 90s grunge influence in their sound. And like Joe said, anything with Tim Ripper Owens, which sounds like a band or a pretty badass name, but it's not a badass singer. It doesn't have Rob. He sounds like a second-rate Hatfield Halford mashup, and I just don't flat out like his voice. It sounds really pathetic and lame. And it seems like on this album they're trying a little bit too hard to be evil and tough. The playing's good, but kind of the strength of Judas Priest is finding this marriage between kind of like classic rock melodies and metal music, and it's nowhere really to be found on this album. In a very similar vein for 2 stars for that one, by the way. Number 17, I've got Demolition. I'm still at 2 stars. I don't think these are very good albums. I think this is a bit simpler and back to basics compared to Jugulator, and even has some decent moments. I like Machine Man, the opening track, but again, no Rob, no melodies, no hooks. Makes them seem really ordinary. I think One on One is decent, but the vocal performance is borderline cartoonish. I kind of hate the opening melody on Hell is Home. The new metal influence doesn't do it for me. Bloodsuckers isn't bad, but when he does like the peace and justice for all line and all that, like it gets a little bit lame. Close to You, probably my favorite on the album. There's just a perfect recipe for this band's strengths, and not having Rob in it doesn't really do it for me. Next, I've got Angel of Retribution, still at 2 stars. If for a comeback album, it's 3 stars, but is it something I really want to revisit? No, not really. It is cool that they're coming out with the title and just being like, hey, we messed up. We should always have Rob Halford in this band. Of course, it's great. And it kind of seems like old business as usual, but in a bit of a tired fashion. I do think the guitars are a bit tame on some tracks on this album, including the opening track, which I think is pretty weak. I think the production is very straightforward and uninteresting, like most like mid 2000s metal acts, metal albums from this time. Like it could be an Arch Enemy album and you wouldn't really be able to tell. And I just think everything needs to be unleashed a little bit more. They're very obviously to me getting the cobwebs off. Really hate the song Revolution. And I think Worth Fighting For and Angel are really lame. Loch Ness really drags it on at the end. So, for getting back into the swing of things, it's not bad, but for just an album, it is pretty lousy, which makes this next entry as my number 16, 15, even more puzzling. Like they do this comeback album and it's not quite perfect. So they're like, hell, let's do a 140-minute friggin' double album or whatever, 100 minutes. Nostradamus is my number 15. I do think it's a step up though, because at least they're trying something new. I do kind of like the symphonic quality. So I'm at 2.5 stars. I think it's decent. I don't need to revisit it because it's, I hate saying this because it sounds arbitrary. It's too fucking long. Just too damn long. You need, I don't have time for this. And it's, if you have this amount of depth into an album, this much time, the text of it has to be really, really engaging. And it's fine, but it's just kind of like classic metal tropes and stuff like that. I did like, some of the production and the symphonic stuff. I do like a prophecy with that kind of fever pitch of like war. But also the thing is like the problem with Judas Priest when they're not at their best is when they're not being themselves. They're kind of falling into typical metal or falling into typical 70s stuff, kind of with a little bit of the early stuff. When they're on doing their brand, they're awesome. And right here, I think they're trying to be Iron Maiden a little bit, and it's not really working that well. It's decent. So those are my bottom 4.
Bottom for me is Demolition. I think Tipton as a producer does a pretty decent job. I think it's an okay sounding record, but just direction wise, they seem a little lost. It's kind of fast and thrashy, but it's also like trying to modernize with some like new metal elements with like some down-tuned guitars and those kind of drum beats and stuff. I don't know. It seems like they're trying to be modern. They're also trying to please their 80s fans, but they're also trying to like keep up with like the heavier bands. It's just like they're trying to do everything and it's not exactly working. I think Ripper Owens, I think his voice is perfectly fine. As a singer, he doesn't bother me, but as a writer, I think he's way, way, way worse than Halford. I think his melodies are really juvenile, really clunky. His lyrics are awful. So to me, that's where he really falls short of Halford. Yeah, some of the lyrics are just so bad. So you motherfuckers want to race. You've all got losers tattooed on your face. Just hilariously dumb lyrics. And then a step up from there. That one's 2 stars. I've got Jugulator at 2.5 stars. Pretty much the same thing. This one doesn't have like the new metal elements, so that's why I think it's slightly better, but it's the same situation. Just his writing is not good. His melodies are all very like a lot of like saying one word at a time, like just like things that sound heavy. And that's all it really is. Next up, I've got Redeemer of Souls from 2014, also at 2.5 stars. This one is where you get Richie Faulkner coming in on guitar, replacing KK Downing. I think it's fine. It's a little bit of a return to more of a straightforward sound after the big symphonic Nostradamus. But I think it's pretty much the safest thing they could have done. There's not a ton of standouts here. Nothing really that bad either. I don't think it sounds quite as good as the other reunion albums. I think the drums sound really, really boxy. March of the Damned, probably my favorite song on the record, but even that is just, I don't know, not really a song I even think about that much. So yeah, that one's just 2.5 stars. Also at 2.5 stars is my number 15, which is Nostradamus, which I think was a bold move on their part. It's 2 CDs, but essentially it's a triple album. It is just a ridiculous amount of music, 103 minutes. It's way too much. It takes a more symphonic approach, which I prefer to them doing like the faster, thrashier, speedy stuff that they had been doing a lot of. So in that way, I'm glad they went in this direction. I like a good bit of the record. I think, there's a lot of really good songs on it. And I think somewhere in here, there's maybe their best album since British Steel. But there's just a lot of other stuff that is not that good. So I think if you take the 10 best songs from this, you've got a pretty darn good record, but it's just so bloated. And yeah, it's ridiculous to think that, they thought all of these songs were essential and none of them could be whittled away. I also think disc 2 is clearly better than disc 1, especially like the last run of tracks on this. Calm Before the Storm, Nostradamus, and Future of Mankind are all excellent. I think it's a great way to close it out. It just takes so long to get there. But I love the theatricality of it too, not just the symphonic elements, but there's like an almost like musical theater type of feeling to Halford's delivery on it that I think is really cool. The drums on Future of Mankind roll. They have that huge sound. It sounds like I Love It Loud by Kiss. Just these massive 80s reverb drums. But then when the band comes in around it, it fits into the mix so well. So I love that track. I think it's just grand and majestic. Pretty good. Would probably be 3 or 3.5 stars if it wasn't so damn long.
Well, I think that tells you all you need to know about Jason's fandom with Judas Priest. I'm not looking forward to the rest of his list. He killed it for me. My number 18 is going to be Demolition. It stinks. I have it at 1 star. Just the lyrics alone make it a 1-star album. It's some of the worst lyrics I've ever heard. It's very new metal. Ripper Owens, like sometimes he sounds like Rob Zombie. Sometimes he does like an Alice in Chains thing. I don't even know who he's like harmonizing with, if it's just himself, like singing both tracks or whatever. But like he has no real personality of his own, I don't think. And just the songs themselves is like all this like tough guy, like fuck you metal, and like that's it. Like there's no nuance. There's nothing. It's a really lousy album. It's much worse than like even the Iron Maiden ones with Blaze. So that's like the low point, I think, for new wave of British heavy metal right there. Demolition. Number 17, I got Jugulator. I have it at 2 stars. I don't think it's quite as bad because it's not quite as like it doesn't have that posturing that's really annoying that Demolition has. And there are like some guitar solos, which is nice. I don't think there's like a single one on Demolition, or at least none that I would ever like even think about. Jugulator at least has like some of that DNA from classic Priest. Ripper's still doing like that weird like Alice in Chains stuff sometimes, but it's not like when I was listening to Demolition, I was like physically in pain. And Jugulator, I'm just like, this isn't good. So 2 stars for Jugulator. I think it is a step up. Number 16, I got Nostradamus. Man, I mean, I there's a 3.5-star album in here, maybe at best. Even like if you pared it down, I just don't think they do this style that well. It sounds way too much like Iron Maiden in parts, and even his voice. At this point, his vocals really kind of start to like match Dickinson's the older that they get. And there's some cool stuff, but like there are so many segues, like little 1.5 minute, like just instrumental pieces that have really no point at all. And they're just like every other song. So I just don't get really what they were going for. Like why? Do you need that little part that sounds exactly like the next part after the song? Like it's too much. They should have trimmed it down a lot. At least would have been interesting and a change up at least for him, which would have been nice, but they didn't quite nail that one. Number 15, I'm going back to the beginning with Rockarola. And this one's fine. I just think they do it so much better immediately after, beginning with Sad Wings of Destiny and Sin After Sin. Like that 70s kind of classic rock sound. This is just, them starting out. Like there's some blues in here, some psychedelic. They bust out some harmonica and stuff. I think Halford sounds a lot like David Bowie on the title track. And some prog influence and stuff like Winter Deep, Freeze Winter, Retreat Cheater, which is a very awkward title, I gotta say. Um, a lot of it sounds like it's influenced by like Sabbath, especially stuff from like The Wizard, and some Deep Purple in there, of course, some Queen, and it's surprisingly like laid back. Like if you're not familiar with this era of Judas Priest, like you wouldn't think like this is a metal band really at all. So it's just sort of before they get into their wheelhouse. It's interesting, but I wouldn't go back to it, especially with like the next couple albums available. So 3 stars for that one, 2.5 for Nostradamus, if I didn't say that.
All right. So we're all pretty much in the same ballpark here. My number 14, Jason already talked about. I've got Redeemer of Souls. I've got it at 2.5. I think it's decent. He hit the nail on the head, though, when he said that this is one of their worst sounding albums. And all I really hear, everything's like behind these pretty ordinary guitar riffs where pretty sure I can only hear like the bottom 3 strings. Like it's just this bright kind of nothingness. I don't know. This is a little bit more back to their roots than the previous 2 reunion albums, which is why this is weird. This is their 3rd reunion album rather than their first. Like it's just weird that the shittier one came out first and then they did Nostradamus and they were like, okay, we should probably just simplify this. We just got back together. And I feel like this is that album. Title track's decent. Rob's voice is still good. It's not quite what it was, but it's still admirable. Faulkner is new on this one, which is kind of neither here nor there. It's just fine. Wouldn't have known it unless you read about it. I like Halls of Valhalla. I think Metalizer is probably my favorite on the album. But, my problems with metal albums are that they get repetitive within the album and to other albums. So that's kind of where I am here. Number 13, I've got Firepower. I am still at 2.5 stars. And this one to me is basically Redeemer of Souls, the sequel. Like, there's not a lot of difference to me between these 2 albums. I think Lightning Strikes is good. I think there's a bit more fire and energy here. I don't think there's anything monumentally interesting or creative in the mix, in the songwriting. And it kind of just like begs that question, like, when are you just going to stop? Like, it's how different are these songs to the other 17 albums worth of material? Like, is there this burning artistic sensation to just do things you've already done a lot for 30, 40 years and just do it again, slightly different than you did it before? I don't know, man. That's just kind of, to me, the problem with this genre. Number 12, I've got Ram It Down, and I've got this one at 2.5 stars as well. Yeah, just kind of more of the same. I like how heated it is right off the bat. There's that big scream, that big riff. Then it's got this really epic chorus into the solo. There's no way they could follow up what they had before this. You got no David Holland on the drums here. It's not a bad album, but it's a bit like mid to late 80s by metal numbers. The harmonies and the layering sound great. I like the tones on this album. It's almost sounding a little bit more, of its time, like Motley Crue a little bit. The drums are pretty cool on Love Zone. It's fun. It's not their most thought-provoking or interesting stuff, but it's enjoyable. Really like that plastic kind of guitar sound on Blood Red Skies. Really good high range at times from Rob here. I think they feel a little bit burnt out. The songwriting's not there. The passion's not entirely there. I'm a Rocker is pretty badass. I dig that late 80s feel. Johnny Be Good really pisses me off on this album. They're like, why are you doing this? It doesn't fit your mystique, your dynamic, like your aura at all. Like, let Van Halen or Motley Crue do this silly version of Johnny Be Good. I think it's closer to 3 stars than I realized, but I think it just kind of resembles a little bit of the slight problems I have with some of their first records where they're kind of just in the crowded field of bands that sound like them and don't do it quite as well. And I think they're kind of doing this, getting into that mid to late 80s sound. But I still did think that there were some moments on it that I liked. And then number 11 for me, I've got Point of Entry. Still pretty good. A lot of people call this their sellout album. They pretty much even admitted that they gave in to the company's needs and desires. But I don't think it's that bad. I think Heading Out on the Highway is cool. It's definitely got a perkier radio vibe, like every song they want to kind of land on the charts or something. The riffs are kind of on the back burner a little bit. And it's got a bit of this bland, like late 70s, even like AOR, kind of like lame rock radio kind of feel to it. The thrash is gone, but I don't dislike any of it. It's just nothing's really standing out. Nothing's like as fun or furious as you get. Like nothing really gets your blood boiling. I do think there's some kind of cool moments, like the soft kind of guitar work and soloing on Turning Circles, but everything feels pretty cautious. That British Steel Passion's just gone. Desert Plains probably my favorite on the album. I think Solar Angels is kind of cool, but it's a bit too sunny. Like the song You Say Yes, just kind of calculated. You don't get that wildfire kind of personality. So it's just kind of out of suit for me, but I didn't dislike it. I would probably like it a little bit more if it just had a different band name attached to it. I'd be like, oh yeah, this is decent. But it's like, oh, this is Judas Priest. This is kind of underwhelming, but just outside my top 10 for point of entry, 2.5 stars.
All right. My number 14 is Firepower. They get Tom Allom back, the first record that he produced since Ram It Down. I think the production on this is a lot better than it was on Redeemer of Souls. I think the drums sound great on it. I think the playing is really strong. It's kind of the same style as Redeemer of Souls, where they're kind of like blending their classic era with their heavier post Painkiller sound a little bit. But I think compared to Redeemer of Souls, this one just has a lot more energy. They seem a little revitalized. I think they got better riffs, better songs. I think Redeemer of Souls felt a little bit like going through the motions, and maybe like a little bit of just like tail between your legs after Nostradamus a little bit. So I think they're getting back to being Judas Priest here a little bit more. But still, I know a lot of people really like herald this record as like one of their best in ages, and I don't think it quite reaches that level. I think it's good for where they are in their career. I think it's good for like being this deep into their career and this deep into the reunion, and to still be going and still be making something this good. But I don't think it comes close to stacking up to their best stuff. I think Halford, like Joe mentioned, I think he's starting to sound a lot like Dickinson on these later albums. I think nowhere more so than on this record, and the track Rising from Ruins basically sounds like it has Bruce Dickinson singing on it. And I think it runs a little long. I think all the best stuff is stacked near the front, and then the last 20 minutes or so of the record just kind of drags on and on. But I still think it's a decent record. I've got it up to 3 stars here. My number 13 is Ram It Down from 1988. I think the title track on this record is freaking awesome. I think it's really fast, really ferocious. One of my favorite solo sections in their entire catalog. The guitar solos on this are so good. It's got that really melodic poppy bridge section too, right before it explodes into the guitar work. So yeah, I think that track alone elevates this record a little bit. Outside of that though, I don't know how great of a record it is. 4 of the songs here were written for the Twin Turbos project that got cut down to a single album. And I don't know, the record itself doesn't, from what I could gather reading around online, doesn't seem to be very well thought of among Judas Priest fans. And I kind of get it, but I'm also a little surprised at how harsh the opinions seem to be. If Turbo was like the synth album, then I think this is kind of like the drum machine album. You've got those really big, clangy, mechanical drum sounds on this. I think the writing isn't great. A chorus that just repeats heavy metal is not exactly that creative. And then the Johnny Be Good is terrible. This album does have a lot of problems, but I think it's also a lot heavier than Turbo. I think there's a lot of great guitar work on it. Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, 3 stars for Ram It Down. Okay, this is where we get... All right.
Don't do it. I know what's coming. Don't do it.
Number 12. What's coming, Joe? You know what's coming. It's Painkiller. You get Scott Travis of Racer X joining on drums. Total no holds barred commitment to heavy and fast metal on this record. The opening drums on Painkiller announce a new era of the band. Halford's going for the throat, basically living at the top of his range for this entire thing. I think Chris Tangrady's production is really good. I think this is kind of what you want a metal record to sound like. But for my personal taste, though, I just find it a little taxing to listen to it in full. It is so much double bass coming at you the entire time. It's just exhausting, and I don't find any of it to be memorable. It's just an assault on you. So song-wise, I just don't really care for any of the songs here. And it just feels like one long track. I realize metalheads will vehemently disagree with me here, but I don't know. It also just kind of bums me out that from this point on, basically, this marks the end of Judas Priest being fun at all. It becomes super serious. They become like hellbent on being evil and dark and fast and heavy. And what was great about earlier Priest is totally lost. The kind of tongue-in-cheek, the humor, the melodies, and it's just not what I want from my Judas Priest. But it is a well-made metal record, and if you love the genre of metal, there's no denying that this will probably give you what you're after. So, but just for me, it's only 3 stars. My number 11 is Angel of Retribution. This is the first reunion record, the return of Rob Halford. I think it's a pretty solid effort. Halford said at the time that it picks up where Painkiller left off. I mostly agree with that, but I think it's definitely less thrashy and speedy, a bit more melodic. Deal with the Devil has the classic 80s era Judas Priest riff. There's some good choruses and bridge melodies on this record. Revolution is very 80s sounding. So it's worth fighting for. But unlike on Demolition, the record before, it doesn't feel like they're just trying to appease fans. I think there's a more natural blending of styles here, the older 80s stuff and the heavier stuff. Demonizer, which is a little on the heavier side, has Travis's really fast double bass work, followed by Wheels of Fire, which has a really classic 80s vibe. I think Angel is kind of a nice acoustic ballad. They haven't had one of those in a while in their discography. And, these reunion type of albums are hard to do well, and I think they do a pretty admirable job on this one. I think it's solid. I think it adds to their legacy more than it detracts, so I think it was a good thing for them to get back together. 3 stars.
All right. For the most part, other than one for both of you, we're pretty much on course here for similar top 10s, at least the same 10. My number 14 is going to be Point of Entry. I just think this one stands out for how much it like blends in. Like you have British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance around it, and like this weird 81 album that I usually accidentally skip it. Like when I was listening to the discography, I just completely skipped Point of Entry. I went from British Steel right into Screaming for Vengeance. And I was like, wait, am I missing something? It's like, oh yeah, Point of Entry, the album that everyone forgets about. And yeah, Cramser said, kind of bowed to the pressures of the record company, or like, give us more hits. So they tuned it down a little bit. They had already kind of gone away from like that classic 70s metal sound. British Steel had a lot less solos, a little more like compact riffs. So in this one, it's like everything's trying to be Living After Midnight. Like it's just really simplified, softer. The riffs aren't as interesting. There's very few solos. So like kind of all the things that I like about Judas Priest went out the window. Production's a little grittier. It's not quite as smooth and perfect as British Steel is. And it's just safe songwriting. It's just, other than Desert Plains and Headed Out to the Highway, which are both very good. I mean, those are sort of like Living After Midnight template, like just good hard rock. Everything else just too smooth, too boring, too anonymous. Anybody could have written this album. So 3 stars for that one. Number 13, I'm going to go with Redeemer of Souls. I'm up to 3.5, and I like this one. I do miss KK Downing, and I do think Richie Faulkner's, I don't know if it's just him or they just decide to simplify, but like the riffs do become like a little ordinary again. It's like I've heard these riffs. Like if you listen to metal, you've probably heard like close to these riffs before, and that kind of that definitely holds it back. The solos aren't quite as ridiculous. I still like the sound. I like the double kick drums. I like the aggressiveness. I think Dragonaut's pretty darn good. Redeemer of Souls is really good. But kind of in the middle there, it starts to sound a little too similar. I like Metalizer. and Battle Cry a lot. So I think there's just plenty of good stuff in there, but it's 62 minutes long. It's too long for sort of just keeping to this basic sound. I miss those curveballs. I do miss the humor. I miss the acoustic ballads and the piano and the Queen stuff. So I definitely get where Jason is coming from, saying after Painkiller it all kind of goes to hell for him. But I like this sound, so I'm gonna like this album. I think they do it well, and I think they all sound good. I think despite getting a little bit of like that operatic Bruce Dickinson wail in there, Rob Halford still sounds pretty good, and it's not mixed and produced as well. I think the guitars have like an odder tone, like they're a little muffled sometimes. So it's not quite as good as their other comeback stuff, but I think it's decent. Number 12, their first comeback album, Redeemer of Souls, was a comeback from Nostradamus. Angel of Retribution was a comeback from Demolition. So anything was going to sound good in comparison. But I think they do a real good job of bringing back, the classic Judas Priest sound, at least like Painkiller-ish sound. It's still really hard and fast, and they still do like some of the slower stuff. Like they throw in Angel, softer acoustic, and Eulogy, but it doesn't quite have the same, I don't know, gravitas and connection as their 70s and acoustic and lighter stuff. It just, they kind of lost that ability to write those slower, softer ballads, I think, at some point. So those don't work as well, but you got the double kick drum fury on Demonizer, which is sort of like a Painkiller continuation. Hellrider has a ridiculous extended guitar solo. If you like the double kick drum, you're gonna like this stuff. If you don't, like Jason, you're not gonna. But I love like that just energy that you get from it just continuously throughout. And I think, compared to most of the other metal bands around 2005, sounds pretty damn good. And I think I prefer it to a lot of the Iron Maiden stuff that, it gets really plodding and slow. Judas Priest doesn't get plodding and slow, like other than maybe Nostradamus, but for the most part, like that speed, I just think helps their sound so much. I think the guitar solos from KK, Downing, and Tipton are great on this, and Halford sounds great. So 3.5. It's pretty close to 4. It might be 4. I don't know. I didn't get to listen to that one quite as much because I was too busy listening to their 70s and 80s stuff, but it could go 4 stars someday. Number 11, I got Ram It Down, which I think at this point is just a little weirdly overhated. I don't think it's great. I obviously don't think it's as good as Turbo, which is sort of like their sellout record of the 80s. But I mean, Ram It Down, the title track, is incredible. Like those guitar solos, like just outrageous. Like, is that where like Dragon Force and like all those like whatever metal bands, power metal bands, like took their sound? Because like you get like that feel where it's just like these are the greatest guitar players in the world at the top of their game. They're doing like sweep picking and like there's tapping. And one underrated thing I think about KK Downing and Tipton is like they kept learning new techniques as time went on. Like they didn't just stick with what they knew in the 70s. Like they started learning tapping after Van Halen came around in the late 70s. They started learning sweep picking and like all sorts of like, contemporary metal techniques. They're like, hey, we're gonna learn, we're gonna get better. And it, they really showed off on Ram It Down. It's incredible. Rest of the album, it's highs and lows. There's some cool stuff in the first half. Heavy metal's not bad. Love Zone, Hard as Iron is pretty fun. And I like Blood Red Skies a lot. They kind of go progressive back to their roots with some, a multi-part epic, 7+ minutes, do some gentle guitars, and then Halford's bringing out his 70s wail. But Johnny B. Good sucks. Love You to Death, Monsters of Rock, and I'm a Rocker. Like that last half really just kind of lets it down. And I think they had better tracks. Thunder Road, which is a bonus track on Point of Entry, and Fire Burns Below, which they stuck on to the end of Stained Class for whatever reason when they did the remakes. Both could have replaced a couple of these songs. and it would have been better. So I have it at 3.5 stars. I think it's just overhated because I don't think it's that much worse than Turbo, and I don't know. People seem to really hate it. So I don't know. I don't know what you're hearing, guys. Come on, it's not that bad.
No, it's not nearly that bad. My number 10, I've got Rock and Rolla, and I'm at 2.5 stars. And I kind of like what they're going for more than their execution, because like I didn't really know this version of Judas Priest exists, like this throwback old school more 70s classic rock kind of feel. Like it's almost straight up just like 2 parts Deep Purple, 2 parts Black Sabbath. Like you get Roger Bain producing from Sabbath, and like it sounds exactly like that to me at times, which is kind of cool. I don't know if I'm more impressed with it just because I didn't know it existed like this version, or if I actually think it's that good. But it kind of grooves really cool. There's really cool guitar work. I mean, there's guitar work that's just exceptional all over the discography, and it's very different on these first few albums. I think he's got pretty good frontman presence, even though he's going to get a lot better. Um, but it's just kind of like a knockoff to me of everything going on around this time, and just a little bit second rate. Like I want them to have their brand and their stamp on everything, but they're not as good as Badfinger and Sabbath and Deep Purple and all these kind of bands that are trying to emulate. They definitely blow Kiss out of the water. I'll give them that. But like Winter Deep Freeze is so Sabbathy, and the second half of the album has some pretty rockin' 70s sick rock grooves on it. But just like never satisfied, nothing really standing out. There's not anything that makes them like this individualistic, expressive act. It screams just like opening band for those bands that I already mentioned, like just a warm up piece. They don't really have, their talent's not really coming out. It's just a little bit like the song Run of the Mill, pretty uneventful, despite some nice vibes. Everything's just a little bit too familiar. For Rob Halford's, just overall grandeur, it's a little bit pedestrian on this album. I think the second half is better. But you get songs like Caviar and Meths, kind of throwaway. And, but best song on it for me is Diamonds and Rust, which is kind of like a precursor to what they will become, where it's like, got that a little bit of British new wave heavy metal, Steve Harris kind of gallop to it. So I think there are really good routes here to get where they need to go, but I still think it's just merely a decent album for Rock and Roll. 2.5, number 10.
All right, my number 10 comes from, I guess, the classic era of the band, but this one, of all those classic records, is the one that just, I don't know, something about it doesn't quite click for me. I've got Killing Machine, aka Hellbent for Leather, at number 10. I think this is a pretty obvious move towards a more commercial sound for them. And their trajectory is really weird. You would think like you start with this classic rock sound and then you move more commercial, but they'll like take one step towards commerciality and then one step back and then like do something really heavy and then make like a record like Turbo and then switch back to something else heavy. Really weird how they kind of like bounced back and forth between sounds through this era. But this one, I don't know. For me, some of it works and some of it doesn't. Rock Forever is a cool track, but I think the lyrics are really corny. And they're doing that like staggered harmony that doesn't work for me. It's like they think that they're singing The Weight or something. It does have a sick guitar solo on it, though. The chorus of Evening Star, I think, is pretty wimpy and cheesy, too. The record sounds good, though, although not too terribly different from Stained Class. But I feel like sometimes at points on this record, the record is just like slightly heavy-handed in its production, especially with like the vocal effects on Halford's voice. A lot of times he is just like slathered in effect, and it's like it almost doesn't even sound human. Take on the World, I think, is a ridiculous song. I guess it's kind of like trying to be their We Will Rock You. It was their first top 40 hit in the UK. It went to number 14, but it doesn't really work for me. I think the big gang vocals are just kind of silly sounding. Interesting note, though, that the Human League covered that song on one of their tours. And so I don't know, it's weird. I'm not against them going in a more commercial direction. And I think on subsequent records where they do a more commercial sound, they do it really well. They have really good written pop songs that are also heavy. But here it's just like, I don't know. I don't think the songs are good enough. They're like poppy, but not in a good way. So I don't know. It's just not quite there for me. The songwriting wise, I think the production is maybe a little too forced. Just doesn't quite hit. So 3 stars.
Okie dokie. Kicking off top 10. I'm up to 4 stars, at least here on out. I'm going with Firepower for my number 10. And I think it's clearly the best since the Tim Ripper Owens era was, put down. Just right off the bat, I think Firepower and Lightning Strike are their best 1-2 punch to open an album since Painkiller. I just love the speed. They bring back the thrash tempos, and they're just so much fun right off the bat. It's great. And then after that, there's a bunch of songs that kind of sound like they could be on Redeemer of Souls or Angel of Retribution. Never the Heroes, Necromancer, Children of the Sun is really kind of Iron Maiden-y. Rising from the Ruins sort of has an annoying vocal part. But then they get back with Flamethrower, Spectre, Trader's Gate, Sea of Red at the end there is a cool, change up. They bring back some classical guitar. And I think this one just has more variety than, the previous 3 ones with Halford. And Firepower and Lightning Strike are 2 good enough singles to elevate it. I think those are the 2 best songs they've written since they got back together, since Painkiller, easily. So that's what elevates it up to 4 stars for me. And that's it. That's it. 4 stars. Firepower. I think it's very good.
I've got Sad Wings of Destiny. And the first time around, I didn't really get it. And my big complaint was that it sounded a little bit comical at times until I kind of realized I was like, well, this is kind of just like their playfulness and their tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude coming through. And it's meant to be done on purpose, and it kind of makes sense, and it kind of works. So it elevated for me. I had this at 2 stars, like towards the bottom first time around, but full star revival here. Rob is taking some big strides. He's got more attitude, more range, more command. It's a cool statement leading off with an 8-minute epic. I think the Ripper is really cool. There's a lot of fierce licks here with some cool juxtaposition with his higher vocals. Not everything slaps for me. Dream Deceiver, I think, is a bit weak. I think Deceiver is a much cooler track. But I do like some of the no-nonsense kind of aspects of it, like when the guitars really screech and roar. It's just on fire. You get some cool, like, dark, cavernous piano on Prelude, really creating the kind of cryptic, creepy metal genre. Tyrant, I think, is pretty cool. I get kind of like some early to mid Scorpions kind of vibe on this album, to be honest, a little bit. And I like Genocide a good bit. It's definitely a step up from Rock and Rolla. I think their rhythm section brings a little bit more to be desired here, and their songwriting. But overall, I think that their character's coming out a lot more on this album. I think Epitaph is a really cool little change up. Really nice, obvious Freddie Mercury kind of impression there. Which is where you get, the Queen influence is kind of where you get a little bit of more of that, just kind of like enjoyable foolishness. And it's definitely an improvement over the debut. So number 9, 3 stars for Sad Wings of Destiny.
All right, my number 9 is Defenders of the Faith from 1984, produced by Tom Allom again. I think this is pretty similar in sound to Screaming for Vengeance, but I think I like the sound of this one a little better than Screaming for Vengeance. I think the guitars sound better, but I think where it comes up a little short of that record is just in the quality of songs. I don't think anything on here matches the heights of something like Electric Eye or You've Got Another Thing Coming. So to me, it's just like a slightly lesser version of that record. The solos on this record are continuing to get shreddier and shreddier. And I think that was a really good point that Joe made about them learning different techniques. They really changed styles a lot, like from the band's inception through their later years. But I think the solo and lead work on this record is really good. Some heads are going to roll. Maybe Night Comes Down would be the standouts for me. But even those don't blow me away. So I don't know. This one is just kind of middle of the road Priest for me. It's decent, but none of the tracks like really fully grab me. I think it's an okay sounding record production wise, but there's nothing even really stand out about that. It's just like decent sounding. So just a 3-star record for me.
How dare you? You insult the Italian, you'll pay. My number 9, let me get a little controversial here. I got British Steel as my number 9. Calm down there in the peanut gallery, Cramser. Listen, British Steel is a good record. I actually like it more now than I did coming into this. I've never thought it's that good. I've always thought it goes away from what I love about Judas Priest, which is ripping guitar solos and speedy tempos. And this kind of slows it down a little bit. There's very few guitar solos. It's a obvious sort of play for mainstream and radio, and sounds a little AC/DC-ish at times, which if you like that, if you like those kind of more plodding, big chunky riffs, sure, you'll love this. But people act like this is the beginning of thrash and everything. No, that was stained class. This is a more simplified version of those big riffs. And it's fine. I think it's good. Dave Holland takes over as drummer. He's just not as interesting as Les Binks. Les Binks was a studio drummer. He threw in all those double kick drums. I think he's maybe the most underrated drummer in history. Dave Holland's, great stuff. The drums sound amazing on this album. That crack on Breaking the Law coming in is just like beautiful. It's magical. Sounds great, but I just don't think the songs are what I'm looking for in Judas Priest as much. I don't like Living After Midnight that much. I ranked every single Judas Priest song. That's in the hundreds for me. I do think it starts off good with Rapid Fire. I think that's sort of classic sounding. Metal God's a little too slow and plodding for me. Breaking the Law, which I used to not like, but now I think it's great. I really like the lyrics. It's a nice look at sort of, the class struggle between upper and lower classes. Like they're getting a little political here. I think it works. I think it's smart. Grinder, yeah, some blues in there. I think getting back to maybe their early 70s sound. United is another one of those big soccer stadium sing-alongs that they seem to do like one on every record for a period of time. It's a lot like Take on the World, but it's another one with like, hey, let's do We Will Rock You, let's get everybody singing along. It's kind of cool, but it's not my favorite version of the Judas Priest sound. And Living After Midnight, I don't really care for that much. You don't have to be able to be wise. Sounds like AC/DC. The Rage, however, is really cool. Like they're like, hey, let's make a Police song or something like that intro, like that sort of like almost reggae. You actually get some really cool bass work from Ian Hill, which I don't think anyone has mentioned. I don't think anyone will mention ever again because he's just there holding it down. He doesn't have a lot of flashy parts, but he does get to break out a little bit on The Rage, which is a great song. I love The Rage. And Steeler's cool. Steeler has that speed, more technical metal, a little less of the blues. So it's good. I mean, it's a 4-star album. I just don't really come back to it. It's a little too simplified, a little too mainstream for me. So it's number 9. But I love Priest, so it's not like dissing it so much. I just like the other stuff more.
My number 8, I've got Turbo, 3 stars. I think it's good. I didn't really know much about this album. I knew the rumors behind it. I knew how the faithful hated it. And man, is that an overreaction? It's not like this is a friggin' Gary Newman album or something. There's not that much synth on it, for God's sakes. Come on, what the hell? And the little touches that they do with it are pretty damn cool. I'm here for it. I think they keep their style and their momentum, and they just kind of add a little bit of it. It's not that big of a deal. Turbo Lover is cool. I like the dreamy little breakdown in the middle. Like the backlash you get about this, you think it was like an experimental synth ambient record or something. What the hell? Songs are pretty good. Private Property is cool. You get those late 80s vibes, kind of that opening riff on Parental Guidance. Also read that it's like a really glammy album, and I'm like, is it? I don't really think it's that glammy. It might be a little more glamorous, but it's not a glam rock album or something. I don't know. I think this is one of the most misinterpreted albums of all time. I think it's cool. I like Out in the Cold a lot. I don't really think what the big fuss is. It's not an amazing album. It's not that big of a step in different directions. I find that hardcore metal fans and hard rock fans are some of just like the most stubborn, like irrational, reactionary folks in the world. So 3 stars for Turbo, and it's number 8 for me.
All right. My number 8 is another controversial one. I've got Screaming for Vengeance. This was the band's US breakthrough. I don't love it the way a lot of people do. I kind of understand why people do like it so much. It's kind of them recommitting to metal after the kind of out of character point of entry, while sort of maintaining a certain level of accessibility. Electric Eye and You've Got Another Thing Coming have awesome riffs. But for me, I think next to Redeemer of Souls, this is probably the worst sounding Judas Priest record. And I think production wise, I think it's really sloppy. The guitar tones, I think, are really piercing and really harsh. I think the low end is like really loose and kind of like the two ends don't match. Like you've got these really metallic 80s sounding guitars and this really kind of like flabby 70s sounding drum kit. And it just does not mix for me. I was talking on another record about Halford's voice being super processed, and it is super processed on this record too. It is just loaded with effects, just unnecessary stuff. And maybe that's intended to make him sound not human, but it almost takes on like this feeling of like modern music with like auto tune, where like there's so much effect on it. You're like, what is even real? I don't know what is happening with his voice on this record. So I think there is some strong material here, some good metal tunes, but just the sound of this record is really off-putting to me. So I've only got it at 3 stars still.
Screaming for vengeance against you, Jason, for that. My number 8, I'm going to go with another one that people love. At least it seems like they do in the Judas Priest community. And I like, I mean, again, it's top 10, 4 stars. But I got Sad Wings of Destiny in my number 8. It's a huge step up over Rock and Roll. Everything just sounds much better. I think they've sort of narrowed in on their sound a lot more. This is where they really introduce like the Queen stuff, the Freddie Mercury, a lot of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath influence here. Victim of Changes is real, like still like got that bluesiness to it. The lyrics seem to, they're a little more Deep Purple-y, but it sounds much better than anything on Rock and Roll. The production, the guitar tones, the vocals, just the whole aura of the band really sounds good now. It's very dark throughout. You got track about Jack the Ripper, which is great. That harmonized little riff to kick things off is fantastic. I love the way Halford sounds singing it. Not too much processing, just like him showing off, which is great. Dreamer Deceiver sounds, it's, I don't know, it's kind of a weird psychedelic track, which is cool. There's a lot of variation on this album. Prelude sounds like Queen. Deceiver has like a speed metal riff, almost like a Galloping Triplet style. And, they're getting into like that thrashy, heavy metal sound, that speedy sound. There's some cool harmonized solos on Tyrant. And it's like it's so close to like their peak sound, but I still think it's like just a little bit under like what they would become when they really got everything all together. Island of Domination got a lot of obvious double entendres about S&M and stuff like that. So it's Rob kind of working in his leather and a lot of S&M stuff he throws in. Some of the lyrics, which is great. I love that he kind of sneaks that into the metal crowd. So I think it's cool. It's a very cool sounding album. It's just not quite as good as they become. So 4 stars for Sad Wings of Destiny.
All right, my number 7, and I'm kind of in the same, I'm at 3.5 now, which is kind of Joe territory. So maybe since my list is better and I'm better, I might be the bigger Judas Priest fan here. But I've got Killing Machine / Hellbent on Leather here, 3.5. I think it's very good. So I think there are 7 very good Judas Priest albums at least. This one is more mainstream, more accessible. They're really going for the radio here, and sometimes it works. Tell you when it doesn't. Evening Star is one of the worst songs I've ever heard in my life. It is so lame. It is such like this wannabe radio rock hook in the chorus without putting any effort into it, like at all. And when he's like in the inspirations and new sensations and all that, it just makes me cringe. I don't know what, if they were like, we need a song that moms are gonna like or something. Like, I don't know what the hell they were going for here. It's a terrible song. Take on the World, though, is admittingly weird, cheesy, and bad, and I kind of love it. I think it's friggin' awesome. I think it's hilarious that they went for it and delivered the way they did. Yeah, I think it was just a great calculation there. I think Burning Up is great. I love Green Monalishi or whatever it's called. Has that cool call and response between the guitarist and singer that I dig. Second half, I think, is even better than the first. I think the riffs are really good. I think it's right on that borderline of being like this accessible kind of hard metal rock kind of thing. It's solid all the way through, other than Evening Star, which is just an abomination to the audio sensations of my life. But I really dig the rest of it. 3.5, which means it's very good. And that's my number 7.
My number 7 is Turbo. And yeah, I think Cram's kind of right about the overreaction to the synths on this. It's like metal fans are like, oh, I heard a keyboard and it upset me. There's hardly any synth on this record. It's on the first track pretty prominently, so I guess that's what it's remembered for, but it's not used that much. They do definitely go in a poppier direction on this record, though. I hear a lot of like Def Leppard kind of in the sound of this record. Out in the Cold sounds like maybe kind of like it could have fit on the following year's Whitesnake record. So they're playing it up to the MTV crowd a little bit here. But even in doing so, I don't think it's all that much of a departure. I think it seems like a pretty natural progression for them, just like kind of like a small update to their sound, changing with the times. I think the title track is pretty good. Locked In is really cool. I love Halford's vocals on that one. It's got a really cool, like neoclassical type of solo on it as well. Parental Guidance is really poppy, but the hooks I think are really strong. The flip side is All Around the World, which is hooky and poppy, but I don't think it's a strong hook. I think it's kind of cheesy, kind of a stadium rock sing-along. It does have a killer solo on it, though. So in some way, I get why people were upset with this record after Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith. But I think for what it is, it's pretty good. I think the songs are catchy, and I think they're catchy without going too far. I don't think they go into the schlock of like a lot of other hair metal bands. I think they do still retain kind of a hard edge and a certain level of respectability in going poppier. So I think it's a decent record. Not great, but it's all right. So 3 stars.
All right. Well, my number 7 is Turbo as well. There was a time I would have had it higher. But when we were doing the Album of the Year series, I did think that the bonus track, All Fired Up, which is incredible, and I really wish it was on this album. I'll put it back on the album when I redo the Twin Turbos for a special side 4 video coming sometime this week. So without All Fired Up, I'm knocking it down to 4 stars. And you guys are right. Total overreaction. Because, a synth was on here. And, I'll say Private Property, Parental Guidance, Rock You All Around the World. It's got that like Twisted Sister, like Us Against the Parents kind of vibe to it. And I think that was sort of a turnoff. A lot more songs about love and, teenage rebellion. And maybe they're a little old for that kind of thing. I don't know. They've been around for a while to kind of pull that out now. But I think the riffs, the songs are all great. I mean, Turbo Lover's really cool the way it comes in. It's got that like really like slow kind of build up with the synths and everything. And it is, different from what they were normally doing. I think it's really cool sounding. One of my faves. It was actually the song that got me listening to Judas Priest, because I heard it on like one of those music channels on the TV, and I was like, who the hell is this? And I was like, oh, Judas Priest. I didn't know they did this kind of thing. So I'm all for the synths. I love Out in the Cold. I love the way it builds. It's really spooky sounding. It would be like a perfect song for a horror movie soundtrack. Just the best intro. Some really great guitar solos on this album. They're just completely shredding. I don't know. People think this album is silly, whatever. If you took out Private Property, Parental Guidance, and Rock You All Around the World, and put in 3 of the harder tracks in the Twin Turbo sessions, it'd probably be a 5-star album for me. As it is, 4 stars, but I will build a 5-star album out of it. I guarantee.
That sounds like a pretty cool side 4. Thank you for doing that. Number 6 for me, I've got Stained Class, 3.5. I like White Heat, Red Hot a lot. I find Exciter a bit lame, to be honest. And one thing this album doesn't have that I love, that I've kind of sprinkled my admiration for throughout the history of this channel, Simon Phillips on drums. No more, but it's not a huge drum. I actually really like the tom work on Better By You, Better By Me. Les Binks, which apparently for some reason got a lot of controversy for inspiring like a double suicide or something, which is a topic that we could probably have in a different episode about like, are artists at fault for things like this? I don't really think they are. I love the new British metal chug on the title track. Solo rules, like I feel like on this album, that's where they're really starting to take off, with just being like, are we pretty damn friggin' good at guitar? We should just like really take off here and keep it up here. I think they're really spreading their wings. I think Invader is pretty awesome. I like this style of theatrics and epic behavior. Like, I know a lot of the times on the channel we've talked about how I don't really like a lot of the over operatic theatrical goofiness, but sometimes when it works, and for Judas it works. Problem I have are just kind of the same genre problems at times. I think it's a bit samey, but the playing on this is like exactly what they're good at, while being like a little bit loose, but like that controlled loose wildfire with power kind of feel. I think Saints in Hell is great. Beyond the Realms of Death. I don't always love it when Rob is going with like that softer low end. I like when he's just kind of bringing it fast and hard, which is, what you get most of the time. But sometimes when he tries to be a little bit more like beautiful with his voice, it doesn't really hit. But I really dig the production opening up on Fire Burns Below. It's got those industrial kind of machine drums. I love the spurt of creativity throughout, and I want more of it. So I think it's a really good album. So 3.5 Stained Class for me.
My number 6 is Point of Entry. They go for a more commercial sound on this. Again, I feel like I've said that about like 5 of the albums, but I don't know. I think it's interesting. They recorded this in Spain, and I think it's one of the few situations where they kind of wrote in the studio a lot, and it kind of feels that way. A lot of it feels like, okay, here's like some power chords we're going to bash out, and we're going to just like throw a song on top of it. And it doesn't always work. I think maybe that's why it feels a little lesser than some of their other ones. It's a little less prepared ahead of time and, meticulously crafted. But they were at the same time as sort of rushing it along, going for a poppier sound. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it a little. I think the album's a little one-dimensional, but at the same time, I think it's pretty lean and pretty hooky, and I like how it sounds. I think it does yield some pretty interesting moments. I think You Say Yes is really cool. It's very different for them. It's got like this, I don't know, it's kind of like a stiff, almost new wavy type of groove. It almost feels like a little bit like My Sharona or something. But I like that song a lot. Turning Circles is pretty cool as well. But at the same time, it does feel like it's a little inessential, gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. But I just kind of like the vibe of it. So it's my first 3.5. I think it's a good record, even if it's not like full of bangers.
Okay, I'm with Crams are my number 6. I got Stained Class, but I'm up to 4.5 stars. I think this is pretty much, one of the essential metal albums of all time. So much, like just the influence it obviously had on bands like Metallica when they did Kill 'Em All, White Heat, Red Hot. His influence on Hetfield's vocal delivery and style, that kind of barking, the thrashy guitars. It's just like, well, we know where Metallica came from. It's this album. It's not British Steel, please. Someone may have put forth that theory. No. Stained Class is definitely where that whole genre just evolved right out of. You don't have quite as big production. Roger Glover not producing this one. This one was the band and some other people, Dennis and McKay and James Guthrie. So it's a little thinner, a little uglier sounding, a little less 70s, like classic rock sounding. But you still have the sonic trademarks, double kick drums coming in a bunch, speedy tempos, great twin guitar interplay, some fantasy lyrics. It seems like, Queen 2 was a big influence on this album as well, especially something like Ogre Battle. Exciter, I think, is great, just fast and furious. The double kick drum, the White Heat Red Hot is just a foundational thrash metal song. I love the cover of Better by You, Better Than Me, originally by Spooky Tooth. This one, they just take it and they add like a little bit of like dirt and grit to it, and it's just so much better than the original. They're so good at covers between Diamonds and Rust, Green Manalishi, and Better by You, Better Than Me. Wish they had done a lot more, because everyone that they touched, except uh Johnny Be Good, which wasn't even a cover. They took the lyrics and they rewrote the music. Doesn't make any sense, but the rest of the covers are awesome. Stained Class is great, Invader's great, Saints in Hell great, just like savage riff after savage riff, great guitar parts. Then they changed things up Beyond the Realms of Death, which is like a really classic sounding, big build up, ridiculously long extended guitar solo, incredible. There's a soft acoustic part in there, and then a thrash outro with another sick solo. It's just ridiculous epic, kind of throwing it back to Sin After Sin. And Hero's End rules too, another great like thrash metal riff in there. You can hear the DNA and later stuff by Metallica and Megadeth and all that stuff. So the only thing that keeps this from 5 is maybe the production's a little thin for me, but everything else is great. The drums are incredible. The guitars, Halford, just amazing. Amazing metal. 4.5 stars, Stained Class.
All right, top 5. And I think these are probably considered maybe the main big 5 for Judas Priest. Like, if we get. So my number 5, I got Screaming for Vengeance, 3.5. I think it's really good. I really like the vibe on this album. I think the songs hold up. I think it's got great album feel. The bashing and the riffing are back. Kind of feel like this is a bit of like their party album to me. Like, it's a little bit close to like, not the sound and production, but just kind of like the celebratory nature of like hair metal almost. I think it's a little bit like less mean and evil and just more of just like a coming out party or something. More rockin', celebratory. Not a bad thing. Riding on the Wind is really good. I think Rob is just like on fire on this album, really belting it out, doing his high pitched screams and wails. I even think it's like a bit of ahead of its time quite regularly. Bloodstone as killer guitar finds such a good balance between cutting loose and honing in on the songwriting. Pain and Pleasure has like almost like this Billy Squier kind of feel to it with that riff, and I really dig it. I don't think there's a bad song on here. I think the title track is really hot, has some sick cosmic soloing on it. The solos are just ripping. I like Fever a good bit. There's just not like one of those top 10, 20 like need to have Judas Priest tracks. But everything is like on the cusp. Like it fills out the top 30 for me. It just, I don't know. It's not quite great to me. And that's also just because I'm not a huge metal fan, but like in the realm of metal, yeah, I could totally see this being like, how is this not a 4.5 or 5 star album? But for me, I just really, really like it. I don't quite love it, but I get it. Trust me, I get it. And there are reasons why I like other albums more, and we'll get to that.
All right. Well, if you've been keeping track of what I've talked about so far, I think it should be pretty obvious with what I have left that I gravitate heavily towards the early stuff. And my number, what is this, 5? My number 5 is Rockarola, the debut record, recorded live in the studio with Roger Bain producing. He produced the first 3 Sabbath records, and it's very different from later Priest stuff. It's very bluesy, kind of hard rock. There's some slight prog elements in there as well. Hear a lot of like UFO, Deep Purple, Sabbath, Uriah Heep, all that kind of stuff. You even get like some other touches that you get like, I don't think anywhere else in the catalog. You got like some harmonica going on a few tracks. Some very cool guitar parts too. I love the guitar on Rockarola. Run of the Mill, I think, is a really sweet tune. It's kind of lurching, spacey jam, some great soloing on it. Halford is just like wailing on that track, like Gillan on Child in Time, just hitting the super high notes. So it's not their signature sound, but I think it's good for what it is. I think most people look at it as like not what they want from Priest, and they would prefer what they developed into. So I think they look at it as kind of like a stepping stone type of record. And I don't know, I just kind of like it for what it is. I like this sound a lot. I think song wise, maybe not quite as memorable. It's a little jammier and a little bit more about the band and the guitar playing and stuff rather than the hooks and the melodies. But I think it's just a cool album. I like it a lot. I like the sound of it. I think it sounds really good. So I got it at 3.5.
Alrighty. Number 5, I'm going with Killing Machine. I think the production is a little bit better than Stained Class. The riffs still meaty. The drums from Les Binks are great, even more ferocious. Lots of variety. And yes, this is like their move towards leather and studs and a little more pop and a little more, hey, let's get on the radio, let's get famous, whatever. Turn down the prog and the 70s classic rock a little bit. But there's just so much good stuff here. I will give Kramzer that Evening Star is like it's one of those like you kind of hear it and you're like, well, it's not great, and I don't understand what they were going for. It's the worst on the album for sure. And like it's so poppy, and that chorus is so weak. It's probably their weakest, like lamest chorus. And then they even do like the step up key change at the end, like they're friggin', I don't know, whatever 70s, but the Carpenters or something, where it's just like, hey, let's take it out. Like that's not their wheelhouse. Like they shouldn't have done that one. It's not a great song. It kind of annoys me, but everything else is fantastic. I love delivering the goods. Like you get that like revving up your motorcycle feel to it. Rock Forever's got a great riff. Hellbent for Leather is one of my favorite songs from them. I love the little like bridge into that tapping solo, back into that little bridge part. The drums on it are just amazing. Burning Up is sick. Just I love the breakdown where it kind of gets softer and quieter, and they're doing some more interesting stuff, and then it kicks back into the riff. Green Manalishi is one of my favorite covers of all time. I think they do justice. I love the Peter Green Fleetwood Mac original, but like they just add like that little extra meanness and evilness to it, and the twin guitar solos are so excellent that I kind of like it better. So no apologies there. Killing Machine rules. Halford on this album, he's doing like this evil like Elvis Presley almost. Like he's just like changing his style up enough. He's getting a little sexier, a little more like confident. Still has like some of that humor, that lighter touch that you lose, pretty much after this album. Take on the World, you got the big soccer stadium chant. I like it. I think it's cool sounding. I like the drums a lot. Yeah, I just think it's a really cool album. Before the Dawn is like a proto hair metal ballad, which is awesome. Got that like soft, sweet acoustic guitar, and Halford's just really emotional lyrics. And Evil Fantasy is another one of those S&M sort of like you read the lyrics, you're like, whoa, Rob, good Lord. But that's cool. That's Rob. He's gonna throw it in there, make the metalhead sing along to his sexual fantasies. That's fine. I like it. So 4.5 stars for Killing Machine.
Number 4 for me, Sin After Sin, Simon Phillips. That's the reason why I love this guy on drums. I love him when he toured with The Who. He does good stuff with Toto. He's one of the best utility drummers of all time. It's their major label debut, and the quality is just light years ahead. And this is the Rob voice and swagger that we all know. Diamonds and Rust is a perfect cover with that gallop. Starbreaker is pretty damn badass. What a riff. I think they're just kind of in their sweet spot on this album. And Simon Phillips really is just upping the game here. The production is up. Everything's just better. The guitar tones are really awesome. Like the snarling dog. Last Rose is pretty nice. Got some great soloing on it. Love the guitar layering and the vocals on Let Us Pray. It's almost like this Joe keeps using the word mean, like, and I almost get like this Roger Waters kind of quality at time with the songwriting. If he was more metaled out, obviously. I think everything about this album is just kind of them finding themselves in their sweet spot, and it's really good. Still giving off that tough energy and attitude and being riff driven metal. Raw Deal's really cool. Cool lead over the top. I love the chug at the end. Here Comes the Tears is like this operatic version of Rob I don't care for really. It's maybe one of the only downsides of the album. Dissident Aggressor is just so badass. It's just a song caught on fire with like these volcanic eruptions. And I kind of like during this period where they're tacking on, at least, I think in the deluxe or like bonus discs, putting on like these live versions of songs, which was just kind of a nice little treat. Like you get Jawbreaker live at the end on the version I listened to. But yeah, I think it's just really, really, really good, explosive, downhill, hard rock metal. And Simon Phillips on drums just does it for me. I just love his instincts, love his feel on everything he does.
All right, my number 4 is British Steel, the first with Dave Holland on drums. They're still doing the kind of more accessible sound that Killing Machine started, but I think they're doing it a lot more successfully here. Just think they have a lot better songs on this record. Rapid Fire and Grinder still like really heavy and fast, straight ahead metal. Then you've got like some sillier moments like Metal Gods, but the silly moments on this record feel a lot more knowing and like tongue in cheek rather than like the silly moments on Killing Machine where it felt like just corny and kind of a swing and a miss. United is like another stab at them doing a big stadium anthem, We Will Rock You type of song. And I think this one works a little better. It's weird still, and it's kind of out of place, but I think it's oddly enjoyable. I think Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight are just like the perfect balance of hard rock and metal and pop, super memorable, super catchy riffs. I think it's just a really balanced album. It's heavy, but it has good pop hooks. It's memorable. It sounds pretty good. Some killer riffs, some killer solos. I think overall just a very strong distillation of their sound and what they do. So 3.5 stars for me.
All right, number 4, we had Defenders of the Faith. Very much a sequel to Screaming for Vengeance. You know, it's more catchy metal songs, screaming guitar solos, stadium-sized choruses, aggressive tempos, intense drumming. You know, I think the production really matches the feel of the songs. It's very like dystopian, end the world, you know, song like The Sentinel, where it's just like you're living in a ruined world and you know here's some giant metal beast or whatever. You know, it's very much insular sound where everything's a little muffled. So I kind of get where Jason's coming from with his production issues as far as like the low end goes, but to me it works for this type of music. Like the guitars are like really up front and they are the stars of the show, so you know why change that? That's a good thing. Free Will Burning, you know, just kick you right in the face to kick things off. Speed and Aggression up to 11. Jawbreaker is a cataclysm of drums and guitars. Rock Hard Ride Free is a little, you know, simpler, closer to like single material. A couple really nice melodic guitar solos on that one. Big anthemic metal. Sentinel's a little more progressive sounding. One of the best solos in, I think, the entire catalog. Love Bites is probably my favorite on the album. One of my favorite Judas Priest songs. Just the way it builds, like that slow burn, the repeating riff. It's got like a horror movie soundtrack again with the lyrics and just the way it feels. Like it's very different for them. And I think it's a really cool, you know, foray into a different style, not quite as you know big and aggressive and heavy and fast as most of the other songs are. If there's one fault, it's definitely Eat Me Alive. It just turns sort of like the aggressive, sexual, weird fantasies to like a whole new level. And they got put on the parental music resources center's filthy 15 for it. And I totally get it because there are some ridiculous lyrics in that bad boy. But you know, I think it's pretty tongue-in-cheek, obviously. Some Heads Are Gonna Roll rules. Night Comes Down, great. Heavy Duty / Defenders of the Faith. It's kind of one song, kind of merges into the other. Sort of like their sing-along stadium chorus, like We Are the Metal Gods kind of thing. So not the strongest end of the album, but there's just enough great stuff on here between Free Will Burning and Jawbreaker and Love Bites. And some heads are going to roll, just classics of metal. But an easy 4.5 stars for Defenders of the Faith.
Yeah, it's my number 3, and I've got it at 3.5. Free Will Burning, yeah, man, is a really good opener. It's really electric, really bumping. I love when Rob is doing his rapid firing. The speed is the name of the game. Like, I don't think they have a song I dislike that's fast. Like, the songs I dislike in Judas Priest are just off that track, and guitars are burning up. So cool. Solo is unreal. Feels like they are really pushing themselves and embracing this metal genre more and more. Not really too concerned with radio play on this album. But again, there's still this like notion of being melodic and tuneful, getting like a little bit of Ronnie Dio vibes at times with his vocals. I think it's pretty cool. Jawbreaker is damn cool. I like Rock Hard Ride Free. I like you describing it as like more of a single effort for this album. It's kind of like dramatic and epic and memorable. The album is just relentless with like this blistering attitude. Love Bites isn't my favorite, but it is kind of this cool, slow clunker, kind of dungeon-esque feel. Eat Me Alive. I mean, metal and oral sex, so dirty and badass. Some heads are going to roll really strong. Even the simple stuff on this album has a lot of heart and energy behind it. Like the passion's just through the roof, off the charts. Night Comes Down is a nice little slowdown, and the mood there carries over into Heavy Duty with that sense of like sinking metal. It's really cool. I like the little acoustic, mostly instrumental Turn On Your Light at the end. I think it's got really close to great, just really good for me, just because I'm not a metal enthusiast, but it's pretty awesome. 3.5.
All right. Cool. My number 3 is Stained Class. Les Binks comes in on drums, 4th drummer in 4 albums. Like Joe said, I think this is kind of the beginning of the speedy, thrashy metal sound. Like Sin After Sin, I think it's a blueprint for a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands that would start popping up within the next year or so. The opener, Exciter, I think is blistering, fast, really, really good metal tune. White Heat, Red Hot follows nicely, I think, with a nice groove, and they go back to a little bit of their 70s, like earlier 70s hard rock feel on that track. I like Invader a lot. Some really melodic, hooky parts on that song. The solo is very unexpectedly major sounding, like very happy. It doesn't really match the heavier nature of the rest of the song, but it's kind of cool how it plays against it. Beyond the Realms of Death, I think very cool song as well. Got that kind of like acoustic thing happening in the beginning, sort of like this slow building, almost proggy epic sound. Melodically, it feels very influenced by Ronnie James Dio. But then it kicks into like this really heavy rocking chorus section. The solo smokes. Some of the band's best guitar tones, I think, are on this album. I think it's a really strong sounding record. Going towards a more metallic sound on this record for sure compared to the first 3 records, but I think it still works pretty well, and just pretty good tunes throughout. Good record, 3.5 stars.
All right, my number 3, and very, very close to having this at 5 stars. I still have it at 4.5. I flirted with the 5-star for it, but Sin After Sin is my number 3, produced by Roger Glover from Deep Purple. It's got all the DNA from the classic, 70s rock bands. Plenty of Deep Purple, plenty of Queen, plenty of Black Sabbath. But I think at this point, it's really like their own sound, because it's unique and different enough. And it's synthesized those classic bands into their own thing. I think the production on this album is the best, maybe, of any album, maybe up to like Painkiller. So I think Roger does a really great job of just like getting like these really warm 70s tones out of this like almost thrashy, metal band. So it's a cool, it's like a synthesis of all these different things. And like, if you're an 80s Judas Priest fan, like you probably didn't know that they busted out stuff like Last Rose of Summer, like the tender, like really nice and pretty ballads. Cover Joan Baez's Diamonds and Rust, which I think is the coolest thing in the universe. A song about Bob Dylan covered by Judas Priest. I mean, that just rules. And they make it their own. I mean, they make it sound really good. I don't think you'd know it's a nice little folk ballad, but in their hands, they turn into something cool, something unique that works for their sound. Sinner just kicks so much ass. I freaking love it. It's got that metal, but it's got some Deep Purple and the Queen and the Sabbath, but the way they just twist it around into their own thing is really cool. Got that piston pumping tempo to it. Starbreaker's got a great twin guitar solo. You got the Freddie Mercury-esque Last Rose of Summer. Simon Phillips, who's just a studio player at the time, came in and he started using this double kick drum, and it kind of gave them their sound, especially on the closer, just an aggressor, which is just like, good Lord, that just kicks your ass. That screaming intro, just the speed and the aggressiveness of it, might be the hardest song ever recorded to that point in history, which is pretty cool. It's just like mind-boggling. It's awesome. Halford's range just up beyond the stratosphere, up into space. Just such a cool, unique, filled with variety, and just a badass 70s album from Judas Priest, synthesizing all their influences into their own special brand of metal.
Number two, the album I didn't know was this awesome. Painkiller. It's great. 4 stars. I'm at 4 stars. Jason, what are you on, my friend? You got a new drummer here, and you showed off in the first 10 seconds, just opening that thrashing double bass. That's just good bandmanship right there. Being like, here's our new guy. Look at him go. It's awesome. Opening track, Painkiller is terrific. I love the thunder. I love the thrash. I love the poisonous, piercing, like high-pitched vocals from Rob on this. You get a lot of that galloping heroism on Hell Patrol. There's this really great, I think it's their best produced album, no doubt. It sounds amazing. There's that really cool, like late 80s, early 90s, pristine, crystal-esque, biting brightness to it. Really crisp everywhere. I love it. Terrific solos, especially on Hell Patrol. Rob is like this evil little goblin with his high pitched range here. I love it. And he's like also got this cynicism to stuff. Just like really enjoyable, a lot of character to it. All Guns Blazing is this great rally cry, kind of like soldier warm up track. The kick drums on Leather Rebel are immaculate. The verses on this song are great. The riffs are on fire. And most of the songs just have these like catchy little choruses. That's really just like an ID badge on the song, simple and effective. Metal Meltdown is just pure adrenaline. The album's just so cutthroat. And like Jason said, like if you're into metal, this just checks all the boxes. It really does. And I'm not even that much into metal, but I'm just like really just immersed in this. Nightcrawler is epic and badass. I love the cinematic opening. It's really thematic. This may be their most energetic album from start to finish. It's really fast, really tight, really compact, but still freeing. Like it doesn't feel like wound up and like, tight ass. So as that trap for me a little bit where it blends into repetition, which is why I can't go higher than 4. But the album feeling of just pure adrenaline burst is so good. If you want to run or lift or get mad or get pissed, like it just hits those natural human emotions so well. One shot at glory leaves you exhausted and pleasantly spent. It's great. 4 stars. Painkiller.
All right, my top 2 are so like razor thin at the top. It was really tough, but at number 2, I'm going with Sin After Sin, the one produced by Roger Glover. This one's a little thinner sounding than the first 2 records. I think they're starting to head in that more metallic direction a little bit, but it still has a nice analog sound to it. Definitely playing with a bit more speed on this record. You get the double bass parts from Simon Phillips coming in, which really starts to set the template for the new wave of British heavy metal sound. Still got some classic rock influences, though. That guitar tone on Diamonds and Rust is pure Keep Yourself Alive from Queen. It's like the exact sound. I love the balladry on this record. Last Rose of Summer is great. Fantastic guitar playing on that. I love that moment at like 2 minutes and 20 seconds where he just like leans on the whammy bar and it just kind of like throws it out of tune. It's really cool. Let Us Pray, Call for the Priest, super kind of spooky tune. Tons of double bass on that one. Here Come the Tears, I think, is another great ballad that I really like a lot. Great sounding track, killer melodic guitar solo on there. Outside of the ballads on this record, I think I like the songs on my number 1 record a little bit more, but I do think this is a better sounding record. I just think it's really like tight and compact sounding, and really kind of direct and to the point. So kudos to Roger Glover for that. 3.5 stars for Sin After Sin. And these top 2, these are the ones that like I think over time could maybe push up to 4, but 3.5 for me still.
I'm going 5 for my number 2. I can't do it. Painkiller, Painkiller, from 1990. They wisely decided to leave behind the 80s and ram it down and everything else. They get new drummer Scott Travis from Racer X, brings a whole new level of sophistication, mostly to the double kick drum, which is just all over this album. He kicks things off, which I love what Kramzer said about here's Scott. You have you're the new guy. You kick off the new album. That drum opener on Painkiller rules. Halford's shrieking vocals that come in, a totally new style. It's like they were just like, we need to just put everything that happened in Ram It Down and Turbo behind us. We are a new thrash metal band. And I think it just works so well. Title track's epic. Hell Patrol's fantastic. I think there's a lot of melodicism still in the guitars, and the melodies I think are really strong. Leather Rebel has a killer opener. Metal Meltdown basically takes Eruption and like sort of changes it into their own little intro, and then it gets into this thrashy metal song, which is really cool. Nightcrawler has a little bit of that I don't know, melodicism. Like you'd think with a song like Painkiller kicking it off, it's like all thrash, but it's not. Like there's plenty of like really nice sounding things. There's some keyboards on here. Don Airy, who they brought in for the keyboards, actually plays Mini Moog on the bass parts for the whole album. Ian Hill's bass is like mixed in, but like the bass sound is a Mini Moog, which is interesting. Like it adds like a whole new layer to the sound, which is cool. I think the production's really good for 1990. They throw in a couple synths on a touch of evil, which I think is a really strong like metal, not even like a power ballad. It's like a metal. I don't even know. It's like beyond power ballad because it's eviler and like harder and stuff. So it's like a whole new genre. I think it's just all good. Like every song on here is great. There's a 56-second instrumental called Battle Hymn, which is the worst song on the album, but it's still good, even though it's only a minute. It's not really a real song, but everything else is great. KK and Glenn really push themselves. I think the solos and the riffing and everything is just like at a whole new level. The drumming is at a whole new level. Halford's vocals at a whole new level. Like they just reinvented themselves without losing like what made them Judas Priest. I can't believe how well it worked. It's a 5-star album. It's one of the best metal albums of all time, one of the best of the 90s, and really showed those young whippersnapper metal groups who was still boss.
Very nice. All right. My number one is British Steel, 4.5. I can't get to 5 stars on it, but give me a break. I'm doing my best. Rapid Fire is sick. This album almost has some Motorhead vibes on it, especially that song, which is pretty cool. Everything coming together and making this just like the perfect blend of just like menace and metal and fury and melody. Dave Holland on drums really bringing the thrash, which changes the band's dynamic a lot in a good way. And there's just so much passion in the playing. Like I think for a metal band, it's easy to just kind of go through the motions and let the amps and the loudness and the volume and the chugging do the work. But I think you can really just feel like the enjoyment coming off when they're on. Breaking the Law is badass. The guitar screech is so good. Maybe their best sounding album outside of Painkiller. I don't know, between the two. Everything is bright and piercing, but has great balance. It's still really thick and meaty. The only song I don't actually like on this album is Living After Midnight, which is like my least favorite. Like it sounds like something like Foreigner wrote and they're like covering it. It's just really puny, really wimpy. It's like their version of like Hot Blooded. It's just like just stupid, lame. It's like a Rainbow song. And yeah, Rainbow Socks, Jason, sorry. But United, I actually really dig. There's a slickness to this album that nothing really leading up to has. I love how the choruses open up. But it's like got a little bit of poppy tendencies. Like I don't know what Joe was saying where like it was down on his list because it's not just like full throttle soloing and everything. There is a conscious decision for this to be like a songwriting album for them, which I like. The Rage is awesome. It's got that cool little muted guitar part. So you get some new horizons on this album. Steeler, you get pure thrash. I think it's got great creativity and balance. Then you get that majestic red, white, and blue epic, which is really cool. Purely awesome and grand. 4.5 British Steel. Could be a little bit happier to get to 5, but I'm pretty damn happy with it.
Someone's never listened to Rainbow Rising, and it shows. My number one is Sad Wings of Destiny from 1976. Alan Moore on drums on this one, the only record that he's on. Still has that 70s hard rock sound, but it's a little tighter, a little leaner, a little more aggressive than Rockarola. And I love the warmer sound of these 70s records compared to the kind of thinned out 80s metallic sound. But I think on this record, it's actually a little too big and boomy in the low end. And I think it actually kind of softens the impact of some of the tunes. But I think that's one thing that Sin After Sin does a little better. It has like a slightly thinned out, tighter, more direct low end that makes the heaviness kind of hit a little more directly. But aside from that, I think the songs on this record are really good. Victim of Changes is a really cool track. Maybe, I don't know if you guys can place it, but part of that original riff reminds me of a song from the first Rush record, and I can't think of what song it is. I didn't go back and check, but something very kind of Alex Lifeson-esque on that track. I love some of the Queen-esque production on the record too. The Ripper with the like super high vocals panning all around is really cool. I love Halford showing off his lower register on tracks like Dreamer Deceiver, which is awesome. I think that's one of his best vocal performances ever. The way he uses his low range and then gets so high. And it's also kind of like a bluesy delivery, and there's a lot of feeling in it. I just think it's amazing. I love the dual guitar work too. It's not super flashy, just like soaring melodic lines. I love the back and forth soloing on Tyrant, two totally different guitar tones and styles that they're playing with and just going back and forth. It's really cool. The riff and groove on Genocide, I think, feels like they would go with their bigger hits in the next few years. The piano ballad Epitaph is really cool. Again, kind of Queen vibes on that one, but just really cool to have those kind of change ups on these early records where you get like these little deviations from heavy rock. And I think they do those things really well. So 3.5 stars, very close to 4, might get to 4 someday. We'll see how much I come back to it. But yeah, that's my number one.
All right. Number one, Screaming for Vengeance from 1982. I just love everything about this album. The level of technical excellence, the guitar virtuosity, so much higher and beyond anything they'd done on British Steel or Point of Entry. It's kind of like they saw like the new wave of British heavy metal, like revolution coming. Like they saw like Maiden and all those bands and were like, you know what? We're going to outdo them. We're going to cut them off at the path and just kind of show off what we can do. So the course correction over Point of Entry is just like kind of what they did after Ram It Down. They're just like, you know what? We're gonna change things up because we're better than this and we can do better. And Screaming for Vengeance is better. The production, I like it. It's claustrophobic. The drum sounds are a little muted. It's missing like that snap, crackle, and pop that British Steel had. But I like the way it sounds. It's very like apocalyptic sounding. And the whole album has like this tearing across highways, past burning cities on a motorcycle in the dystopian, future kind of vibe, which I think is great. The Hellion Electric Eye kicks things off so well. I think the lyrics alone are really cool. Nice prescient warning about the dangers of the surveillance state. And it's got like that weird, Jason was talking about the production on his voice. And I like it. Like, I think it just adds a new wrinkle to their sound. I don't think they could have really done anything more than they had already accomplished in the past with British Steel and Point of Entry. So they needed something new. And I think they came across a great sound. I think Halford sounds great. He's shrieking, he's sulking, he's growling. That cool, I don't know what they do for the drums on Riding on the Wind. Like it sounds like a volley of like arrows or something. Like it's really cool sounding. I think the songwriting itself is a big step up. Riding on the Wind, Bloodstone, Take These Chains is a cool, like almost power ballad, but still has enough of an edge to it. Pain and Pleasure, Rob's got to have an S&M track on every album, and Pain and Pleasure is his S&M track, and that's good. Screaming for Vengeance is badass. You've got like that big hit with You've Got Another Thing Coming. which I think is way better than like Living After Midnight. Totally blows it away. That just repetitive bass note is really cool. Some really great guitar solos. I don't think they're doing any sweep picking on this, but Downing and Tipton's just level of excellence on these solos, I think, is just a whole nother level. The speed, the precision. Fever is really cool. The way it shifts from almost poppiness to heaviness to that really nice breakdown. And then they end things with Devil's Child, which is kind of a throwback to British Steel. It's a little bluesier, a little like, AC/DC-ish, almost heavier in that way, a little less like metally, thrashy. And I just like every track on here. Every track is in my top like 50, I think. And the highlights with Electric Eye, and you got Nothing Coming and Fever, are just so high. So yeah, it's a 5-star album, and we'll see where it places when we do our 1982 list. I left it off in my original top 5 for 1982. We'll see if it sneaks in. It's tough going up against Number of the Beast, because you have that like obvious comparison, like which side are you going to choose? So we'll see who are the kings of metal 1982.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. 2 weeks away from our big 1982 deep dive. That's coming up. There you go. Judas Priest. Let us know what you think of Judas Priest. Let us know what you think of our lists, how you rank the records down in the comments. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so, hit the bell for notifications, and check the video description for all of the links: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, website, merch, Patreon, all that stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.